pilots live and work. The recruitment, continuous training, and retention of qualified technical workers is a major factor defining mission or business success. And 21st century workforce strategies present special challenges to government. To discuss this critical subject, please welcome to the stage for a moderated discussion of 21st century workforce management, Senior Partner, Korn-Ferry, Jane Sue. Deputy Chief Information Officer, U.S. Citizenship and Information Services, Yemi Oshinai. Chief Information Officer, U.S. Small Business Administration, Maria Roat. And discussion moderator, IT Chief Technology and Innovation Officer for NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Tom Soderstrom. Tom Soderstrom.
No. Thank you very much. It looks like we have an empty chair. Do we have any volunteers? So we are the final panel, and I applaud you for your resilience of still being here. We're going to talk about the 21st century workforce. So just for fun, I did some Googling. Is there anything more fun than that? So if you Google workforce, you get 177 million hits. So it's obviously interesting. And it's not just for government, it's for industry. And having worked for many enterprises, enterprise and government have the same challenges. We can't pay as well as the startups, et cetera. So there's some challenges. And one is the IT evolution is speeding up. There should be no doubt about that. We still have legacy. How do you infuse legacy behavior and legacy tools? We have a growing skill set gap. So how do we handle that? Competition with industry, especially startups, is intense, especially as all of these tools are coming on. And they can pay more, typically. Innovation has to happen faster, and we still have to keep doing our day job. We have to make it happen. We need to infuse these new technology skill sets and new ways of working. So it isn't just the tools, it's the way we apply the tools into the legacy environment. And when you Google and you look at this, the human capital structure was set up a long time ago. And I looked at what GAO's recommendations are, and remarkably, they are very similar to what you're going to hear today. So we're going to need the domain knowledge experience and the new technologies and innovating. And we had a great panel on this earlier. What we wanted to do was, we were all on the panel, and we want to summarize what happened from that panel. We ended up that the recommendations was really to break it into a life cycle. So recruiting first, then retaining, and then retooling or retraining. So what we decided to do is to cover one topic each, and we would like Jane to start talking about, just give you an introduction about yourself, about yourself, and then kind of what were the takeaways on recruiting. And by the way, we should have the slide up, I hope. There it is. All right.
So my name's Jane Sue. I'm a partner with Korn-Ferry. For anyone that doesn't know who Korn-Ferry is, we are an over $2 billion in revenue, publicly traded leadership advisory firm. We primarily provide executive search services, so that's recruiting, and we also provide HR leadership consulting services. I'm a recruiter. I recruit senior executives at the intersect of technology, public and private sector. So in the area of recruiting, I think we first need to acknowledge the fact that the workforce on the ground, the landscape is changing. And we need to better figure out how we're going to capitalize on that. The gig economy is real. Approximately 40% of the workforce today is in some part, a part of the gig economy. And just to further define that, freelancers, contracting work. That number is going to increase over the next 3 years. At the current rate, it's going to hit about 53% in the next 3 years. So with a workforce that looks like that, heavily comprised of millennials, the younger working population, they also, within this group, is changing a lot. It looks very different from when we were coming out of school. It's a lot more liberal and socially conscious. It's a lot more distributed, non-hierarchical, transient, diverse. And then with that, we also have pockets, big pockets within the workforce that are untapped. So for instance, women who leave the workforce for a period of time during their career and ultimately don't come back. How do we get them to come back? How do we get them interested and engaged again back in the workforce, right? So how do we do this? How do we start recruiting? Having a better understanding of what's motivating the folks on the ground today. So we have a generation of people that were coming out of school, let's say post-2007, the housing market crash. Post-2007, and then through the 2010s, slow recovery, slow growth, and really struggling to find work after they're coming out of school. This looks very similar to when I was coming out of college, when I was coming out of school 20 years ago, when the tech market crashed. Couldn't find work, right? And so what becomes important when you are having trouble finding work? It's job security. It's appealing to a sense of greater purpose and pride in what you do. And these are things that we can use, that government can use to be able to better attract talent. So with that said, appealing to this sense of purpose. Now I think agencies like NASA, NIH, CDC, NOAA, going to continue to have increasing success in recruiting because of your inspiring mission and how you're communicating that on the ground. But there will also be some challenges, particularly in areas like DoD R&D, with the tech workforce, right? So how do we get those folks more engaged, more interested in what we're doing? The story around protecting people, serving disadvantaged people, we can use that to appeal to their sense of purpose, right? But we need to be marketing it better. So it was great to see FBI they had a booth over at Tech West, good representation of DHS here. But using platforms like this where you can make yourself a lot more visible and also better tell your story as it relates to innovation. Now, whether you're in tech or you're not in tech, all young people want to be aligned with a company or an organization where it looks innovative and they have access to innovative tools. So being able to tell that story better, I think is also going to become really important. And there's one more piece to that. It has to do with the way we look at talent, needing to become a lot more open-minded in the way that we look at and assess and measure talent. It came up during our conversation, particularly around, let's say, USA jobs and the filtering mechanisms that are used to cull prospective candidates. There are ways in which we can make that a lot more flexible, or that we should try and make it a lot more flexible so that we're not just blocking out huge groups of the workforce that could potentially have, that can offer a great deal of value and contribution to what we do. So I'm going to move on to retaining, right?
So we recruit and we do a good job, but the danger zone, especially for new career hires, starts about 3 to 5 years. So how can we retain them, but also retain the other folks? So.
Oh, wait, and can I just add to that
please.
point? So recruiting earlier, right? Building better partnerships with colleges and universities, but high schools too. I mean, get them early, right? Because while they're still in the process of developing their own perspective, their own views around what's important to them, let's just get them right then, right?
Because I think, Tom, you had some good perspectives on the recruiting piece, because you're getting folks a year and a half before they get out of college and getting them to commit to coming in.
Yeah,
I think that's important for your job and your mission in particular.
And we thought we were proactive and great. We realized that it's going sooner and sooner and sooner. So we're now losing interns that become employees later to Google, Facebook, because they're even way before they graduate.
And you're using your interns to recruit more interns.
Yes, we are, and that's
And they do
what-
the initial vetting even
Exactly.
before they get to the next stage.
So it's the long game, but it's working.
Yeah.
So so now you're going to challenge. We have a challenge in government, and so how do we retain these folks? Maria, you had some great stories. What are the problems and the recommendations?
Yeah, on the retention, you know, you have, and I know Harrison mentioned it earlier, right? The management theory, you know, the balance between the long range, the mid, and the short range, and transition. And as federal employees and as leaders, we have a number of things in our toolkit, right, that we use to retain staff, right? And I'm not going to go into all of those things. You guys are all well aware of those things. But, you know, in being able to balance on that, because I brought up during the panel that, you know, a year ago, OPM came out with the hiring authority. The CIOs can hire 2210s, do direct hire authority. Yay. Before it was only cybersecurity. Right? At the SBA, I had a huge challenge on cybersecurity hires because HR only thought that cybersecurity professionals only worked for the CISO. So if you did cybersecurity, you can only work for the CISO. I will share with you that for an entire day, everybody in my office called Bo Hauser at the time boss. So we did do that for a day. And yeah. Anyway, because I believe that every IT person has fundamental cybersecurity responsibilities. They do, whether you're a network engineer or you're a developer or whatever you're doing, you have cybersecurity responsibilities. So as far as I'm concerned, everybody's got cybersecurity. And with the direct hire authority, one of the things that I want to be able to do is when you look at the mid-range and folks, technology's changing. I want to be able to bring people in. I know they're going to stay for maybe 3 or 4 years. How do I tap into that as the technology continues to change and keep bringing in new talent to bring in and infuse the new technology and be able to do the work? This goes to the recruitment piece, and it kind of goes hand in hand. So if I have an expectation that I will have a 3-year turnover, this was a little contentious during our roundtable because, you know, the model's been you come in and you're a civil servant and you stay for, you know, 30, 40, 20 years, what have you, and then you go to the private sector. Well, you know, I'm seeing more and more of people coming in and coming out of the federal government, and I think that's great because people are bringing in different skill sets. And having that direct hire authority allows me to go out, get the talent, bring somebody in for a year or 2. If they stay, great. You know, I can bring them in for up to 4 years. If I want to, I can extend them beyond that. But having that flexibility is huge on the retention piece and being able to, if I have an expectation that I'm going to keep somebody for 3 years, I can work with that. And I think Rocky was another one that chimed in on that. But I also need those long-term folks for that strategy in the long term and where we're going as an agency that understand. But I know that there's going to be turnover. And then we also talked about on the retention is that if somebody stays with my agency for 12 or 14 years, that's nice, that's good, but is retention also that they're working for the broader federal government? If they get promoted to SES, for instance, and move to another agency, they're still doing things for the greater good. You know, Jane, you talked about the, you're there for the mission, right? A lot of people come in because of public service and because of the mission. You know, NASA's got a great mission, as do, you know, many of the other agencies, and being able to tie to that mission is so important. On the retention, I cannot compete. The federal government cannot compete on scale. You know, not all the agencies have the budget to be able to provide, you know, retention bonuses and all of those things. So what are those things that keep people in its interest in the work? It's the mission, doing cool things. You know, at the SBA, I've got an amazing team, but because we've been able to do some really cool things and they stay, because we allow them to keep doing new things and be able to work. They get the bigger picture, they get the mission, and they understand where we're going. So in addition to all those, you know, usual things you do to retain people and all those things, but it's tying back to the mission and also understanding on retention and having that mindset that people may leave after 3 years and they may go to back to industry or go to industry, then they may come back later on, or they may contribute elsewhere and go to another federal agency. And I think that's great that people move around and broaden their horizons and get that experience, because that's just for the broader good and the benefit across the board.
Those are great points, and that was prevalent, as you said. The mission, the storytelling, feeling pride about what we do will help on the return.
Yeah, and even if you look at the president's management agenda, right, moving from low value to high value work, and as the work changes, and there's certainly a big push on that administrative burden, bringing that down. And Harrison, I'm going to call him out again, made a great point on that, and how they're reducing that, and all that goes to retention, because you're focused on the work, not the administrivia.
No, it's a great point. So Yemi, let's say that we don't want to lose these folks, right? So we're going to have to retool, retrain. The domain knowledge that exists in people who get disintermediated with new technology, we need to keep it somehow. So how do we do the retraining, the retooling of folks?
Sure. And I just want to
apologize. The challenge and the recommendation.
I was just going to apologize for my voice. We actually had these passionate conversations at 2:30 in the morning, so that's why I sound like this.
We know you were out till 2, 3 in the
You solved
morning.
it all on a cocktail napkin. Where's the cocktail napkin in your notes?
Passionate
lost that
over
right
rock
here.
music.
But I will tell you, and also warn you, I'm going to use sports motifs, because out of my career, one of the things that has helped the analogy for the workforce is using football. So, and I'm not prepping you for the playoff games today. But in terms of retooling, whoa.
All right, get the gloves on.
But in terms of retooling, some of the conversation that was pivotal for me in our panel between Maria and Rocky was talking about the ecosystem as not just your agency. Let's look at the ecosystem for the employees as the entire federal space, contractor and federal employee, and how do we retool them using the ecosystem as a platform. Tom even talked about using the Mars rover system as an open source platform and letting everyone engage. That's how you have people get excited about learning. We need to focus on things that are working today and getting those folks excited about it. And that's how we retool. We also made a comment about the budgets, training budgets that we don't use. And that becomes a challenge. I think as we become executives and help with the vision and strategies for training, we need to be able to navigate and help staff navigate so they know when to use the training. Most people don't train because they don't think they need it, and then as they grow in their jobs, they'll grow. But if we can show them where that North Star, I think Harrison said that also, where their North Star is as far as their career, they'll know how to apply the training budgets. They'll know how to apply training. There's also the ability to be diverse in how we manage the workforce. We had a great conversation about reentry of women into the workforce after they've taken time off. A lot of managers don't retool themselves, and they don't know how to do part remote and part on-site work. I think that's critical for the new workforce, especially in the DC area where we are, where you can't find the talent because the cost is high. How do we retool managers to be able to work with remote employees and not see them as remote?
And then people just move around.
Right, why not? And you made up a great point. Why do I want to have someone in my agency for 10 years? It's like any good coach. Every year I have a new team, and I need to make that team a winning team every year. So as we retool the staff, we need to retool our strategies. We need to retool how managers manage and make that a playbook so that we can give each manager, each executive a way to build out an agency. Because if someone leaves my agency after 2 years to go to yours, you want them to be a superstar. I don't want to send you something that can't help you grow and can't help your agency grow. So I think this retooling conversation becomes sort of a larger discussion about building out our ecosystem as a federal mission.
Yeah, I saw a slide, this was something a couple of months ago, where it looked at the body of work across the federal government and things people do, the different functions. And way over on the left side of the chart, there was about 40 things. And way on the left-hand side was all this administrative stuff, right? And where automation and RPAs come in. And it was really, really high, the amount of hours federal government spends. And coming back to training, and you look all the way over on the right side, very small is the mentoring, the training, right, the amount of time that federal employees and others spend on it. And it was very telling when you look at the left side and all the just hours spent on moving paper versus the actual mentoring and training that actually happens.
That's a really good point.
It's just, it was really telling.
At JPL, we have a formal mentoring program, and it's people get actually rewarded for being mentors. But what we've seen is we see this reverse mentoring. So the people with the main knowledge, the people who know how to build robots, get mentors, the young people coming in with new technologies. But the cross-mentoring happens too. So by having these cross-functional teams, we are able to hopefully retool and retain and retrain all at the same time. And that's been working, it almost works better informally.
Right.
So training by the developers for developers, and you bring in somebody who's not necessarily a developer into the team, and that part, that cycle works.
Well, then it's critical, because if you look at technology and how it's evolved, we're here talking about AI and ML. If you're working as a PM in the government space and you're so busy with administrative, as a team comes in with that knowledge, you're not able to keep up. Yeah. So we need to formalize those things. We need to not only be cross-functional, but let someone else do another job so they know how to work with those teams.
It's not just technical skill set, though, because as AI and emerging tech starts to have a lot more impact on how we operate in the work environment, certain other skill sets are going to increasingly become a lot more important. And how are we going to counter that? Critical thinking, creativity, interpersonal skills, and emotional connections. These things are going to become a lot more important. How do we retool for that? How do we train for that?
One of the things that, high recommendation to all of you, as these new people come in, they're very eager and they know the skills, trying to find an opportunity for them to show off what they built, not talk about it, but show it to a very senior executive, then you get that cross-mentoring and everybody wins. That works, at least at JPL. Mm-hmm. So we have an hour left for questions. Just want to let you know the golf game is canceled. This panel is more important. 177 million people cannot be wrong. Let's open it up for questions, and we will tackle it as best as we can. You have the experts on stage here. So put my sunglasses on.
And you're not allowed to be quiet because we will call on you.
I'll walk around.
Oh dear, Michael's standing up back there.
All right, I see one back there.
Yeah.
If you don't mind saying your name and your agency or company, and then question.
Sure. My name's Greg Gershman from a company called Ad Hoc. We have a fully remote team. We're a vendor, so it's kind of a two-part question. I'd love to hear how you think about vendors as part of your just overall skill set strategy, and you know how you think about that. And then also remote work. You mentioned it very briefly, but I'd love to hear sort of how you're thinking about that. In your agencies, obviously, it's very dependent upon security and things like that, but would love to hear how you see that evolving and how you're thinking about it.
Okay, great question. Who wants to start?
I'll share with you that coming into SBA, in general, folks really weren't familiar with cloud, any of that type work. So I've been heavily dependent on the contractor workforce to help augment while I'm in the process of training. You know, so while I'm training the federal employees, trying to get them up to speed, get them, you know, there's a mind shift as well, getting away from, you know, rack huggers and those kind of folks to learning the cloud environments. I've been heavily dependent on the contractors, and I need to balance that and have that expertise in both areas. So even while I'm increasing the skills of the federal workforce, I still need that contractor workforce. You know, I like a badgeless environment so that it's integrated, so that maybe at some point I'll need a little bit less on the contractor, but I'll have more feds that are able to do the work, because I'm actually like one deep right now in many areas, and I've got a lot of gaps as well. So I'm heavily dependent on the contractor workforce as we're trying to get through this digital transformation. So it's going to be like that for a little while, but I expect that there's a partnership. And it's generally a badgeless environment with the work that we're doing. On the remote workers, you know, I am highly supportive of remote workers. I have one that's in Houston, highly productive, high-performing individual. I see him maybe a couple of times a year, try to get him in once a quarter. I do see him on Skype. We have an open environment, and sometimes the team's working, and I'll see him up on the screen, and I'll wave and as I go by. But he's a high-performing individual. Love to keep him at the agency. He's done really, really great work. but he doesn't have to be in the office for the work that he's doing. And I would like to see more of that and tap into, there's centers across the whole country that are, where there's universities and areas where there's expertise in different things, and how can I tap into that? And maybe somebody comes in to headquarters for a little bit and then goes back out, and then maybe I see them once a quarter. I don't know what that model looks like, but given that I've got some experience with some of my folks that are more remote, and plus I've got IT personnel across the entire country, so I don't need to see them, and they do go to the centers, but they're not at headquarters. So I've got a distributed workforce all over, but there are some folks that are full-time teleworking,
So-
if you will, working at home.
One of the things that we saw is, I've run remote companies, and it's very effective. Our policies aren't always in line with that. The manager has to check on people, and they have to be there. So we work to change that. And it took a miniature act of Congress, literally, but it works. So the remote work can be very effective. It's also a good tool for retention. As people move around, and they have the domain knowledge, they're good workers, and they move. Now you really want to keep them. So you go through a lot of effort to make it happen, but we should do that more. To your point about contractors, yes, if we can create a virtual island in the cloud where they work, then it really doesn't matter where they are. As long as, your point about Skype is very well put. As a recommendation, if somebody is working from remote, this is what I always tell them, you, the remote worker, have to make a point to be seen. Because we're still humans, and if I don't see you, you're not doing work. So it's, make the effort to meet on Skype or WebEx or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, just another point about the vendor and federal collaboration. We make it a point for our teams even to go to the vendor offices and they'll come to our offices. We see, at least at USCIS, a lot of parity now between where the technical skill is for the Fed and the technical skills of a vendor be coming together. So when we do ideation, we're all in the room. If you're in Seattle and your build team's out there, we have you up on Skype or WebEx, and we're working together. As a matter of fact, a lot of these ideas will come out of anywhere, and like you said, it's a badgeless environment. We don't know who has come up with the idea, and it really doesn't matter. The government has turned into the role of an integrator. I'll give a shout out to Justin, who's on our team back there. We have multiple teams that are doing different segments of a system, and the government federal person needs to integrate that. So the teams, as far as vendors, don't care what company they work for. We all sit down together and figure out a problem, and it becomes more mission-oriented than vendor and Fed-oriented.
Good point. All right. Great question. Do we have any more?
Oh, one more. So this is an interesting combination. We got three folks on the federal side here and somebody from the commercial, kind of executive search world. And I remember when I was in government, we never really used external help trying to find these positions. And I always thought we really could use a lot of help because the workforce is changing, the messaging and marketing to that changing workforce is really important, and the government's not super good at that often. So is there a reason we're not doing it? Is it just money? Is there a way to actually do more of that?
Great question. Who feels like tackling it?
Well, I can tackle it from an experience perspective. About 6 weeks ago, I got one of the stats of some of our federal developers we were hiring. We were getting about 30 folks within a couple weeks saying, yes, I want to be a part of the government. But as they went through the process, they all said no. So I kind of picked up the phone, called USDS and said, help. I don't know what to do, because we can't go out and recruit based on some of the restrictions our HR puts on us. We can't put signs out at conferences. So I went and said, hey, I would love to hire a recruiter just to bring folks in and so we can direct hire. Because I'll tell you what, we do administrative stuff, we do program management, we do IT. We're just not good at recruiting. And it's one of the things that I said to them, I said, I'm going to admit to you right now. So we had about a 2-hour session where they walked through some things of how we can recruit and how they can help us. And to your point, I think we just need to say, I need help. Because there's a challenge, especially in the market. Amazon, Google, they don't require a college degree anymore. But to be anywhere near a 12 to a 15, you almost have to have a PhD. So how do we compete? And it becomes those challenges that are very real.
Yeah,
I will add, just from industry perspective. So Korn-Ferry, we used to do a lot more work. We used to have a lot more engagement directly with government, particularly for the most hardest to fill senior roles. But with that said, even though I do executive recruiting today, I built my career doing entry-level techie search. That's where I started, and that's where I built my foundation from to ultimately get to where I am today. With respect to search, there is a part of our house, so Korn-Ferry is a complex firm. I mean, but I'm gonna just make it really simple, 3 main lines of business. We have executive search. This is the foundation of our business. This is where we built our business on top of. But we also provide leadership or HR leadership consulting services, our advisory side of the house. We also have a part of the house that is not very well known, and we call that RPO, Recruitment Process Outsourcing. It's a relatively new part of our house, but the type of work that we have been doing with large cap companies, like the Walmarts of the world, have been very successful. RPO is literally taking over the entire talent acquisition function of another company, but you can also customize that in different ways. So for instance, if your organization was wanting to expand that into a brand new technology area or a brand new industry, a brand new geography, this part of the house will do that in very short periods of time, up and down the ladder, irrespective of leveling. I do think that it's a very valuable service, just to be cognizant of, just to be aware of, that could ultimately support government and how you think about your workforce going forward as well.
I want to add on the marketing side of it. We are horrible as a federal government marketing what we do. Last year for the New York Fashion Week, there was a Fed Fashion Week, and there were pictures going up. I don't know if anybody saw it or heard about it. I found out about it afterwards, so it wasn't maybe in some circles it was well known, but there was a lot of folks who didn't know about it. And what they did was they took pictures of folks like from CBP or other agencies in their uniform, folks out in the Park Service. But how do you take that and share that on Instagram and elsewhere with a quick snippet of 5, 6, 12, 10 seconds? That these folks that we want to recruit in the federal government, so they could see, oh, I could be that. I could work in the Park Service, or I could work at NASA, or I could work at USCIS, or supporting whatever that is. Being able to do it. I think we need to do a much better job of that. The hiring process notwithstanding, but we can do a much better job at the marketing on that. I mean, right now we're pretty dependent on Twitter and LinkedIn and all of our connections and really pushing out, but we can do a much better job.
I agree. Our best recruiting tool by far is if you Google 7 Minutes of Terror. It's landing on Mars. Absolutely fabulous. A lot of people come to us for that. Another one a few years ago, it's called We're NASA and We Know It. It was young people just dancing and singing, and it became a YouTube sensation. It was just them having fun, and that turns out to be a really good recruiting tool. So I think we need to lighten it a little bit. And the other thing that we have done wrong in the past is writing the recs. So in order to hire somebody, especially from our partners, they need 50 years of Java. Nobody's going to have that. So lighten it up a little bit so we can get more qualified people in, and because it's speeding up so fast. So what I wanted to do is just ask for a lightning round of a recommendation from each of you. What do you recommend? What's the 1 to 3 things that you recommend people should do? Let's start with you, Jane.
So let's just start with ourselves first. We really need to become a lot more open-minded about a lot of different things. A lot more open-minded about how we look at talent, how we assess and measure talent, and how we ultimately retain them. We need to become a lot more better at how we're marketing ourselves, or how government is marketing themselves, using bigger, more visible platforms like tech conferences like this, but also social media, and telling that story better, making it a lot more, telling that innovation and tech story better. And then finally, with respect to keeping them engaged, I also think that it's going to become a lot more important to focus in on certain type of leadership and development. I mean, of course it's important, but we oftentimes overlook certain things that are going to become increasingly important, and that has to do with creativity, innovative thinking, being able to express those thoughts in a comfortable way without feeling like they might potentially get dinged for that. And then how do we foster and nurture that type of environment?
Thank you. Yemi, what do you recommend?
I would say just a reminder to kind of lead with the broader mission, seeing a bigger ecosystem, engage. I think if there's anything, just make sure we're engaging with staff, whether you're federal or a vendor, have that broader sense of engagement. And it's important enough for us to have a playbook, important enough for us to build, real distinct strategies for our building our talent management. And really, last but not least, I learned in the last panel, it can be rocket science. So ask for help when you need it.
Thanks. Maria?
And I'll add on, there are many tools in that tool belt. Use every one of them. Sometimes it's a little less talk and a lot more action. Do stuff, take action, celebrate the little successes to keep people, all of those things, looking from the broader federal government as well, but do things, take action, and don't just talk about, oh, we should do this, we should do this. Just take action and go do it. Stand up a community of practice. Do those things. If it doesn't work, great, try something else, but keep going and keep trying those actions and keep moving.
I agree, and we should double down on the things that work. So I'm going to double down on Maria. That's what I was going to say, is action. People need to feel pride of what they do, and it helps in recruiting, it helps in retention, it helps in retooling. So pride comes not from talking about it, but doing something and being able to show it. So us creating an exciting work environment, that it's exciting to work for government, and it's a privilege, and they can show what they did, is going to make all the difference. So I want to thank you all for your service and your participation, and all of you for still being here. So thank you.